Art, I don't want to alarm you, but
There's almost 12 hours of Treehouse of Horror footage to cover. I've been around long enough to know that a majority of the people watching this video right now don't need to be told for the umpteenth time that The Simpsons is one of the most important, iconic, and dare I say, exceptionally cromulent shows of all time. Nowadays, the show is synonymous with seasonal rot and the ever-classic The Simpsons Will Never Die memes that you see going around the internet at least once a month. And with Disney's relatively recent acquisition of Fox, I think it's safe to say that both the show and the memes aren't going anywhere for a very long time. Thanks a lot, Merkle Mouse.
How long has that boy been treating you like that?
About 24 years.
That being said, at the height of their popularity, and even a bit later, The Simpsons were everywhere.
Eat my shorts.
Okay.
They got their own movie, a popular dance, and were even associated with a whole lot of merch, whether it was Simpsons brand or not. And of course, everyone knows that you can't earn the status of legendary unless you make an appearance at the Ice Capades.
Are you little? Please, it is Ice Capade's policy not to allow strangling in the arena itself.
However, out of everything that The Simpsons has been attached to, I think that none are quite as influential as Treehouse of Horror. Starting in Season 2 and continuing up to the current year, every October, and sometimes November because sports, the family Simpson would put on a menagerie of non-canonical spooky stories, 3 per year to be precise. In the early years, the episodes always started with a warning of sorts, typically from Marge, and wraparounds that connected each segment, whether it be a Halloween party or candy-induced nightmares. These wraparounds were quickly dropped, however, when the show was given less time to broadcast each episode, and the writers decided to focus primarily on the stories, though most of the episodes still included some sort of cold open.
And one thing you'll notice, every year we're always like, we gotta have a big wraparounds and spend hours writing it and then cut it out right before air date. And you'll notice this season, we were like, let's forget it.
The wraparound is the part where Marge said, this is gonna be scary and you should get your kids out of the room and...
Right, and the warning that we're supposed to
That was
have.
one of the first times that we said, forget it about the stuff, right? Quality, like, let's not.
Yeah, then we kept saying it throughout many episodes, yeah.
They called this the Simpsons Halloween Special, followed by whatever number it was in Roman numerals. And while everyone loved the creative original genius that was the title of said specials, it was eventually renamed to Treehouse of Horror by the 13th special. Although technically it was always officially called Treehouse of Horror, since the first Treehouse of Horror revolved around the kids telling scary stories in their treehouse, but for some reason in the episodes they referred to them as The Simpsons Halloween Special for the first 12 specials. And if that wasn't confusing enough, seeing as the first Treehouse of Horror episode aired during Season 2, every subsequent special is always off by 1 from the season that it's currently airing in. Yeah, it's kind of a mess in terms of organization, but it's also produced some of the most classic and quotable moments in television history. These specials also inspired some other Halloween anthology stories, like the almost equally great Terror Tales of the Park series from Regular Show, which some were nervous would just be a kid-friendly version of what The Simpsons were offering, until the first special premiered and had a man's skin completely torn off.
I told you I was ripped.
Now, I could go on and on about some of the nuances of Treehouse of Horror, the amazing nicknames that they come up with for the opening and closing credits, and a certain pair of recurring characters that at least cameo in every special. Oh, we'll talk about them eventually. Don't you worry about that. But given that we've now hit the 30th Treehouse of Horror special last year, I figured that a great way to celebrate this would be to go over every segment of every Treehouse of Horror, going over the synopsis, and giving my overall thoughts about each, finishing off by going over my favorites and least favorites towards the end of this video. Okay, I mean, I guess I could talk about something else, if that's what you really want. I could talk about the life-size Simpsons animatronics created by Gemmy Industries. People find animatronics scary now, right?
I did a hip hop, the hippie do the hip hip hop, you don't stop the rocket.
Okay then. Who was that guy? Anyway, there's over 90 segments to cover, and you better believe that I watched them all. One after the other. In a row. Twice. That being said, covering them all would be quite an undertaking for one person, so I was able to get some friends and fellow content creators to help out and cover a segment or two. Some of them will be uploading their segments to their personal channels, and some might post extended cuts of their versions in this video, so if you want to see some of the segments covered on their own, make sure to check out the creators' channels, and their links will be in the description below. A few other things. For this particular video, while there might be some mentions of wraparounds and cold opens by myself and the others, the video is focused primarily on these segments themselves, and they won't factor into my personal feelings of any segments I mentioned towards the end of the video. I'll also only be covering televised episodes, so media such as the Bart Simpson's Treehouse of Horror annual comics and The Simpsons Night of the Living Treehouse video game on Game Boy Color will not be covered in this particular video. And finally, the episodes Halloween of Horror and Thanksgiving of Horror will also not be covered in this video either, as the former, while being a Halloween episode, doesn't fall into the Treehouse of Horror family, and the latter, while following the same format of Treehouse of Horror, is technically a Thanksgiving episode. Alright, I've wasted enough of your time, and we have a lot to cover. Oh boy, do we have a lot to cover. Let's jump straight into the video, starting where it all begins. At the beginning. Which, again, is Season 2. Actually, this still seems confusing. Let me go through this one more time.
Hey everybody, it's Cargo. Today I'm going to be talking about the first segment of the first Treehouse of Horror, Bad Dream House. Coincidentally, this is probably also the first one I ever saw. That's a lot of firsts. Anyway, Bad Dream House is a story told by Bart about the Simpsons living in a haunted dream house, and hijinks ensue. Pretty simple, but it's executed quite well. You see, this is the third episode of the second season of The Simpsons. Things were rough starting out, so seeing this segment and episode carried out well is kinda surprising. The segment's flow is, well, it's all over the place, but that's okay, because they're mostly focusing on the comedy, not really the story. Speaking of comedy, there is so much randomness in this segment. There's a portal to another dimension, Bart flies to the ceiling, there's a voice telling them to murder each other, and the house kills itself in the end. Great stuff. While it is pretty comedic, it's actually pretty scary too. Multiple lists I've seen have this as one of the scariest segments in all of the Treehouse of Horror episodes. And yeah, I can see that. The first half isn't scary at all, really, but when they're all in bed and that eerie music hits, along with that haunting voice, that's when this segment starts to get pretty dark. Like I said before, they all go to murder each other, and they almost go through with it until Marge tells them to stop. Again, it's kept comedic all the way through, but it is still pretty weird to watch The Simpsons attempt to do something like that. In conclusion, the segment is a good watch for comedy and for horror. It's a good representation of the Treehouse of Horror episodes as a whole, and I highly recommend it.
You didn't tell me it was built on an Indian burial ground! He says he mentioned it 5 or 6 times.
Butt-looking alien!
As the second segment of the entirety of Treehouse of Horror, this segment has quite a legacy to uphold of equally being solid and the weakest of these segments provided. However, Hungry Are the Damned does a spectacular job doing so, even going beyond those limitations that it was supposed to set for itself by arguably being the best offering in the first Treehouse of Horror episode. Don't worry though, because we'll get to that point really soon. This segment is a take on the classic Twilight Zone episode To Serve Man, and it won't be the last time that we see them take inspiration from that show. Again, we'll get there, really soon. The family is barbecuing in their backyard when a UFO abducts them and flies them into space. What follows is the introduction of 2 titular characters that, since their introduction in this segment, have made an appearance in every single Treehouse of Horror episode to date.
Greetings, Earthlings. I am Kang. Kodos and I are taking you to Rigel 4.
Even though in this segment they're more so portrayed as 2 random aliens from their race rather than an inseparable comedic pair, the segment still does a really good job introducing these characters to the world of The Simpsons. The aliens try their best to make sure that the family is well fed and entertained on the way to their home planet, where they'll be welcomed with a big feast, and nobody except Lisa is suspicious. She decides to roam around the spaceship until she finds a cookbook with the title How to Cook Humans. After showing it off to the rest of the family and the aliens get into a back and forth debate about the cookbook's true intentions, with Kang blowing away some space dust, then Lisa blowing away some more space dust, and finally Kang reveals the true title of the book by blowing away the remaining space dust. After finding out that the Simpsons thought that they were going to eat them, the aliens, offended, decide to drop the Simpsons back off at their house, stating that they were only trying to make their lives better before flying off to not be seen again until next Halloween. All in all, this is an extremely memorable segment. Although the segment ends with the horror cliche of the twist is the opposite of the build-up, this segment shines in other areas like the dynamic coloring and lighting during tense moments and, as mentioned before, the characterizations of the aliens. While there is somewhat of a focus on the horror aspect, given that the twist could be guessed from a mile away, the main draw of this segment comes in the form of its humor, which this segment nails.
Anyone from a species that has mastered intergalactic travel, raise your hand.
This segment is a really good introduction to the aliens, and I look forward to seeing Kang and Kodos in future episodes.
There were monsters on that ship, and truly we were them.
Lisa, see what we mean when we say you're too smart for your own good?
The first ever Treehouse of Horror had one portion that, to me, has always stuck out from the rest. Parodies and cartoons aren't uncommon by any means, but The Raven had the ability to combine the humor of The Simpsons with the seeping loneliness of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. Immediately, you're hit with James Earl Jones' voice as the narrator for this portion of the episode.
And weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore.
Also, while I was doing some research on this video, I found out that James Earl Jones was also in the Garfield and Friends show as Diablo. I'm not sure what to do with this information other than to share it with you, so enjoy! Anyway, The Raven strongly follows the lines of the poem itself, allowing The Simpsons to build off the musicality and flow naturally. James Earl Jones narrates most of The Raven, but Homer Simpson does partake in reading some of the lines as well, whether he's quoting it directly or paraphrasing.
Oh, Lenore.
If you don't know what the legendary poem The Raven is about, well, here's a quick synopsis. The unnamed narrator is sitting by a dying fire, reading forgotten lore as a means to try and help him forget about the death of his beloved Lenore. However, there's a tapping at his door. He goes to answer it, only to see that nothing is there, but he feels that his soul is burning. Whatever, he goes back to his seat, only to hear the tapping once again, but this time it's louder. When he goes to investigate, a raven flies into his chambers. The narrator then asks the raven what his name is, and it responds, Nevermore. The narrator talks to the bird, and all the bird responds with is Nevermore. To the point where the narrator brings up his love, Lenore, that this must be a sign from God that he should forget about Lenore, but is met with the response, Nevermore. After lashing out at the bird, it ends with the raven staying perched upon the bust of Pallas, and the narrator accepting and admitting that he is trapped beneath the raven's shadow and shall be lifted nevermore. The episode follows the rhythm of the poem and does so tremendously, while throwing in some classic Simpson vibes. While hearing James Earl Jones quote The Raven is enveloping within its own right, the true sense of uneasiness begins when Dan Castellaneta also quotes The Raven, delivering some well done lines with the voice of Homer Simpson.
Leave no black plume as a token of the lie thy soul has spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken.
These moments are both entertaining and unnerving, because throughout the entirety, you never really feel like you're out of the horror element. Sure, there's no jump scares nor terrifying animation, but it's the delivery of the lines that harbor the most impact. Also making Bart the Raven is icing on the cake.
Nevermore.
There are some comedic moments to try and take you out of the dread that is, well, the Raven, such as Lenore being Marge Simpson with the hair needing one more painting, or Homer screaming, "Why you little," at the Raven, or even Bart stopping the story to criticize that nothing being at the door is boring. This episode always left me with a feeling of uneasiness as a kid, and ultimately pushed me forward into looking deeper into Edgar Allan Poe's writing. The way The Simpsons handled this poem is truly something special, and while that may be my nostalgia talking, I'm sure there's many others that vividly remember how creepy this portion was back in the day.
monkey! Hello, it's ShadeX, and it's time to come clean. I am a Simpsons fan. Treehouse of Horror is one of the most creative things to ever come out of this show. These specials are a yearly tradition, and while they are non-canon, I still love them. So when I heard Dan the Man was doing a video on every Treehouse of Horror segment ever, I just had to be a part of it. I remember seeing a lot of Treehouse of Horror segments. One of them that sticks out for me the most is the Monkey's Paw from Treehouse of Horror II. This is a really good segment, and while it isn't necessarily scary, it is still an enjoyable one. The segment begins with the Simpsons family vacationing in Morocco. Homer buys a monkey's paw from a merchant, despite being warned by him not to buy it. Homer shows it to Marge, and then this funny gag happens.
That little shop right over there. On your way, it was over there.
Be sorry.
The Simpsons are on their way home, but then Homer is at gunpoint by airport security. Homer reveals he is smuggling souvenirs and is told to pay a fine of $2 American. I find this scene very funny. Simpsons then go home and are indecisive on who should get the first wish. Bart and Lisa fight. Bart wants X-ray specs at work, and Lisa wants world peace. Maggie then gets a hold of the monkey's paw and makes the first wish. She makes her wish, and a luxury car shows up. Homer is excited, hoping to get the car, but then it's revealed she wished for a new pacifier. Then the car drives away. Bart then makes a wish that he wants his family to be rich and famous. The Simpsons then become the richest people in Springfield. However, the town quickly grows tired of them. I really like the meta jokes, like the existence of Simpsons music and merch related to the family existing in the show's world. But the best gag has got to be the billboard of Bart that says, "Get a mammogram, man." After that wish goes wrong, Lisa wishes for world peace. Everyone in the world destroys their weapons. Then everyone in America joins hands and forms a peace symbol. King and Kodos then go to Earth to take over Springfield and the rest of the world. The people of Springfield are now slaves to the aliens. The monkey's paw has one wish left, and Homer wishes for a turkey sandwich, hoping nothing will go wrong. He eats the sandwich, hoping it'll be good, but he discovers the turkey is a bit dry, to his sadness. Homer is about to throw away the monkey's paw, but then Ned Flanders asks him about it. He gives it to Ned, hoping that'll give him bad luck. Ned then wishes for the aliens to go away, and then Moe ends up chasing Kang and Kodos with a wooden plank with a nail in it. The two aliens then go back to space. Ned then decides he wants to spruce up the home and makes another wish. Homer then looks jealously at his neighbor's castle and says that he wishes he had a monkey's paw. Overall, the monkey's paw is a fun Treehouse of Horror segment. While not being scary, it is still a great fantasy story. The monkey's paw is very memorable and stands out to me as one of the most classic Treehouse of Horror segments.
Just a weasel! Not unlike the last entry I covered, the Bart Zone is a take on yet another Twilight Zone episode. This one being It's a Good Life. In this segment, Bart has supernatural powers where he can basically do whatever he wants to those around him with just a simple thought, and he can read people's minds. Because of this, everyone in Springfield has to force themselves to be happy, because they don't want to be on Bart's bad side. This all comes together when Homer refuses to change the channel from a football game, and Bart teleports him there in place of the ball. After failing to sneak up on Bart to attack him, Homer is turned into a jack-o'-lantern. And Marge forces Bart and Homer to see Dr. Marvin Monroe for some family therapy. After doing some father-son activities per the suggestion of the not-so-good doctor, Bart and Homer bond more, and Bart even turns Homer back to normal. Homer kisses Bart, and then Bart wakes up screaming. Now remember when I said that the middle segments usually tend to be the weakest of the triad? Well, that's definitely the case here. Not to give too much criticism to this segment, there is still an eerie vibe to it, and it does have its moments of comedy here and there.
And it's no good.
However, the strongest aspect of Bart's character is that nearly every other character in the show is a foil to his rebellious attitude. To have nearly everyone just go along with him, while making sense in terms of the plot, isn't very entertaining or enjoyable to watch in my opinion. And while this segment starts out okay, I feel like it kind of flatlines in the last half, where it changes from a story of a child who can run rampant with these powers to a sort of campy message.
It's alive! It's alive!
Homer gets fired randomly from his job at the power plant while Mr. Burns and Smithers work on finishing up their robot worker, which will make the rest of their workers obsolete. All they need to complete the worker is a brain, so they hit up the graveyard where they find a slumbering Homer, who just so happens to have gotten a job as a gravekeeper after being fired from the plant. They kidnap Homer and take out his brain and put it inside the robot worker.
It's moving! It's alive!
In case I didn't make it clear at this point, I think it's pretty obvious to see what this segment is parodying. The experiment goes wrong, however, when it turns out the robot is acting just like Homer, which means he won't be very good at his job. It's almost like a human's personality and character traits are tied to their brain. Nah, that can't be right. After some convincing from Smithers, Burns decides to put the brain back in Homer's body and is about to return him to his family when the robot falls on top of Burns, crushing every vital organ in his body. In his dying breath, he tells Smithers to sew his head onto Homer's body, and Homer wakes up from the nightmare before Smithers is able to do anything. Or does he? This is definitely a memorable segment not only for how gruesome it was at the time, but oddly enough, the dialogue and bits that played out, especially between Burns and Smithers.
Bed corpse! Bed corpse! Stop scaring Smithers! Satisfied?
Thank you, sir.
This segment is easily the highlight of the episode for me.
Hello everyone, my name is D'Angelo Edwards, host of Hats Off, an official Halloween tax collector. But rather than bleeding you dry for liberal use of spandex, instead today, I have been asked by Dan to participate in this Halloween spooktacular. My lawyers say I can't use that phrase, but I'm doing what I want. I didn't start consuming The Simpsons until later in my life, but when I did, the Treehouse of Horror specials were always my favorite part. Watching the characters run around in these silly, spooky scenarios was almost always a treat. Almost. But for now, I'm going to be looking at a segment from one of the best ones. Clown Without Pity from Treehouse 3. First of all, I want to say I forgot how many classic lines come from this. This thing has some of the best quotes that I hear the most often, so I knew from the start that I was in for a treat.
Ooh, that's bad.
But it comes with a free Frogut.
That's good.
The Frogut is also cursed.
That's bad.
Also, there are a lot of close-ups in this episode. It didn't bother me, but it was very noticeable. But let's get into the actual episode. It starts with Bart having a birthday party, and Homer forgetting to give him a gift, so he rushes off to find Bart a present. And it's funny that he actually owns up to it. Like he sounds like he's gonna try and lie, but he tells the truth and tries to fix it. I miss this Homer. His search takes him to a creepy, if not a bit culturally insensitive, knick-knack store. Homer eventually settles on a definitely cursed doll, and Bart loves it. But soon, it's revealed that the doll is alive and wants to kill Homer. What a shock. I've always been a huge fan of stuff like this. Killer dolls, evil puppets, I don't know why. Maybe it just makes me nostalgic. But Homer spends the segment trying to live, running, and trying to dispose of the doll, before eventually Marge calls customer service and the doll is switched to good mode, where he pretty much just becomes Homer's slave. But it all pays off when he comes home to Lisa's Malibu Stacy. And that's Clown Without Pity. A pretty good segment in one of the best Treehouses of Horror. I really like this one. From the banter between Homer and the doll, to the references to things like Gremlins and Child's Play, there are a few goofs here and there, considering this is an older episode. Like, there are a few shots where Homer and the doll talk but their mouths don't move. Or the fact that they fixed the problem by calling customer support, when Homer definitely did not buy that doll with a box. Also, I think it would have been interesting if we had seen some interactions between Bart and the doll. He kinda just disappears once he gets the present. But these are small things that are overshadowed by how funny the episode is. Though I wish it was just a tad bit creepier. Still, a solid segment and a very solid Treehouse of Horror.
Monkey! Hey everyone, my name's Rushaan and I'm here to talk about King Homer, which is of course a parody of King Kong. So let me go through the plot real quick, if this even counts as a plot. It follows Marge, Mr. Burns, and Smithers going to Ape Island to see the majestic King Homer. It's later revealed that Mr. Burns actually lied to Marge and was trying to make Marge as bait for King Homer. Yeah, I don't know why. This of course failed, and so Mr. Burns had another idea to take King Homer to America for custody. There were a lot of photographers taking pictures of King Homer, which made him mad and basically broke out of the place and grabs Marge and climbs up a tower. But then King Homer collapses and, well, he marries Marge. The end. Literally, that's actually the entire segment. So let me give my thoughts on this really weird but funny segment. I actually really enjoyed it. King Homer as a character was hilarious, and other characters like Marge and Mr. Burns was also really funny. By the way, this is actually the first Treehouse of Horror segment I've ever watched, and it gets me excited to see some of the other segments. I feel like this segment isn't really meant for a story to follow, it's more so for comedic purposes, which I really like. Overall, it's a really funny segment, and I totally recommend it.
Brains. After being assigned to read a more difficult book for a report, Bart finds a book of evil magic spells, and using a spell to bring Snowball the First back to life on the anniversary of the night he died, Bart accidentally casts the wrong spell and unleashes zombies on the town of Springfield. What follows is a plethora of gags in which the citizens of Springfield deal with these zombies, particularly the Simpsons.
Did you barricade the door?
Why? Oh, the zombies. No.
They decide the only way to stop the zombies is to go back to the library and find another book. They all hop in the car and head over, and Bart and Lisa are able to find a book with a spell to either have the zombies willingly go back to their graves, or just fall down in the streets. I don't know, it's never really explained, but that's okay. You might notice that this segment's cover is relatively short, and the reason behind that is that there really isn't much to talk about. It's an all-around solid segment, and the zombified versions of the Springfield residents really stand out. And while the horror is a bit toned down here, it more than makes up for it with the comedy, with some definitive series highlights.
Dad, you killed the zombie Flanders!
He was a zombie?
Careful, hot pan!
So, The Devil and Homer Simpson. Is it a good Treehouse of Horror segment? Yes it is. It is amazing. But let's talk about it. So first of all, the story. So, it's about Homer at work. He's hungry. He wants a donut. And he's like, bruh, there's no donuts around here. What am I gonna do? And then Flanders, who is a devil, if you can believe it or not, he's like, I'll give you a donut if you give me soul. And he's like, aight, sure. So then he gives his soul to Flanders in exchange for a donut. But then Flanders like, if you eat the donut, then your soul, it's mine. Then Homer uses all his brain power and then only eats most of it, but leaves like a little bit left. And he doesn't eat it. So he's like, hey yo, I'm smarter than the devil. And Flanders like, fuck you, Homer. So then one night, Homer's hungry, he goes downstairs to get food, like anyone does. And then sees the bit of the donut in the fridge, and he's like, might as well. So then eats it, and Flanders like, ha, you fucking dumbass, your soul is mine now. And then Lisa and all that come down, and Lisa's like, hey, come on now, give him like a trial or something, you know, just, come on, don't do this to him. And he's like, ugh, fine, but he has to spend a day in hell. And then he goes to hell, and the craziest stuff happens, like he gets chopped up, and then he's forced to eat donuts, which is the greatest. By the way, him eating the donuts is the greatest GIF ever. It's not GIF. I'm calling it GIF. And then the trial happens, a bunch of evil people are there, and they're all saying, yeah, Homer, yeah, he has to go to hell. And even the lawyer that Marge brought just dips. And then they're like, he's going to hell, but Marge's like, nah, I own his soul legally, so I say he stays here. And they're like, she owns his soul, so he stays here. And Flanders like, oh, fuckingly doodly do. And then they all go away, and Homer's like, hey yo, I ain't in hell no more. Life is good. Also, Homer turns into a donut. So yeah, this episode is just funny, you know? Like, it's just a good segment, you know? It's just a prime example of Homer being stupid, you know? And what he'd do for a simple donut, you know? And it's also very creative, you know, showing Flanders is the devil and all that. And yeah, it's just, you know, really funny, you know? Like, the hell segment is my favorite, you know? Like, just seeing Homer in hell and being forced by those donuts, like, it's just fucking amazing. Who wrote this episode? I don't care, but I think whoever wrote it is a genius and deserves to get all the money and visit Area 51. So yeah, this segment was really good, really well written, animation was great, everything about it just good, you know, voice acting and all that, great. Yeah, so thanks to Dan the Man for letting me do this, and yeah, on to the next segment. Yeah.
The bus of the undead!
So a bit of a confession here. Treehouse of Horror IV was my first experience with the Simpsons Halloween escapades, and this is the one that stuck with me the most. Based on the episode Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, it starts with Bart having a nightmare of actually legitimately dying from the school bus crashing on the way to school. Bart's day is already not off to a great start when Lisa embarrasses him in front of the other schoolmates on the bus, but hey, at least he drew attention away from Martin's shirt. Bart's already feeling stressed out, but then he looks out the window and sees that there's a little gremlin-like creature on the side of the bus, and it's slowly tearing the bus apart. After failing to get Milhouse to look out the window, he runs to tell Otto. The gremlin then rips off the gas cap, and Bart gets the whole school bus to look to the other side, but the gremlin seems to have disappeared. Skinner, oh yeah, Skinner's on the bus, I forgot to mention that. Anyway, Skinner gives Bart a warning to not cause disruption on the bus again. After a fake-out scare with Willy hopping on the bus, Bart's getting so desperate for someone to believe him when even Milhouse won't. He looks up to the side again and sees the gremlin is trying to take one of the tires off, and he tries to get everyone's attention again before Skinner goes in for the tackle and ties Bart's hands up so he can't cause any more problems. After tricking Uter, who is introduced in this segment, to untie his hands, Bart comes up with an idea to use the emergency flares that the bus just so happens to have to attack the gremlin, and is able to get it off the bus before it can take the tire off. Ned Flanders runs into the gremlin and decides to take care of it. When they get to school, everyone sees that Bart wasn't talking crazy when they see the damage done to the bus. That being said, the segment ends with Bart being hauled off to the loony bin for his behavior. So, I really like this segment. I think that this is the first segment, and honestly one of the only segments, that focuses on horror over comedy, if only slightly, and the horror that they do pull off is actually unnerving. There's a lot going on, with the question of Bart's sanity, and the actual possible threat of all these children dying on the way to school. That's not to say the comedy is bad, mind you, there's some very funny moments that this segment has to offer. However, I think the standout moment is the actual ending of the segment, which has stuck with me to this day.
I'll be home, Bart! Nosferatu!
Okay, so, since I'm a bat, I wanted to cover something that is the most bat-related Halloween special, which led me to Bart Simpson's Dracula. We start things off with the family watching the news where they talk about someone who was killed by their blood being sucked out of them, and there was a cape that said Dracula at the scene of the crime. The police believed it was a supernatural being, more specifically a mummy. So their best action was to destroy the Egyptian portion of the town's museum. Lisa, on the other hand, fully suspects that it is a vampire that's responsible, which, of course, no one in the family believes her. We then see news about Mr. Byrne buying the blood bank, and we see Byrne's excitement of the purchase with blood dripping from his mouth. It's pretty clear that they want to use the tactic of one person knowing what's really going on compared to everyone else, but they pushed it to the extreme. From the details to the crime scene, to the Dracula cape, and Burns literally licking blood from his lips makes it pretty obvious that vampire shenanigans were going to occur. But no one sees it because everyone in Springfield is really dumb. But that is the charm that I got from this just from the beginning alone. The Simpsons seem to thrive in this sort of scenario. We then see the Simpsons family go to Mr. Burns' country house in Pennsylvania. I don't get this joke. I really don't. We then see Mr. Burns in a more vampire-like outfit, and his shadow doing its own thing. When the family is seated, they are fed blood. Lisa, being justifiably concerned about the situation, spilled the blood on herself and Bart to be excused from the table to figure out what's going on. The way they use the usual tropes that are expected in this scenario to only lead to nothing, while the wackiest ways to show those secret areas were pretty funny to see. The trap door to the laundry room compared to the giant sign that says Top Secret Vampire Room are prime examples that were great to see back to back. As the two walk into the secret vampire room, Bart still doesn't buy into the idea of Burns being a vampire, until we literally see a book that says, yes, I am a vampire. As Lisa looks into this, the vampires in the room decide to hop out of their resting place to attack the two kids. Bart notices immediately and does some silly noises that Lisa interpreted differently from what the situation actually is. This really shows how strong the chemistry is between the two characters, and kind of reversing the situation a tad bit, with Bart trying to state the obvious compared to Lisa not taking his warning noises seriously until the danger is right in her face. As the two run up, Bart sees a lever that says, "Super Fun Happy Slide."
I really shouldn't. But when am I gonna be here again?
What I enjoy about this bit is that it just shows the maturity of Bart and his eagerness to not pass up the opportunity to have fun. Too bad it led to his demise. As Lisa returns back to the family, she tries to express the danger they are in and the loss of Bart. But Burns returns with Bart in hand as he tells them that there's nothing to worry about. Homer dismisses Lisa's warnings once again by comparing Bart's being a vampire to beer killing brain cells. Back at the Simpsons household, Lisa begins to toss and turn in fear as she wakes up from the tapping at her window. When she opens the curtains, she sees Bart in his vampire form along with other kids who fell victim to Bart. When Bart gets ready to swoop in for the kill, Homer and company are able to arrive on time, preventing disaster. Bart quickly makes his escape as he is outnumbered.
Homer, we gotta do something. Today he's drinking people's blood. Tomorrow he could be smoking.
I really like how Marge's concern in getting Bart back is that this somehow leads to a pathway to smoking, because every bad decision can lead to smoking apparently. So the crew has to go back to the home of Burns to be rid of them to get Bart back. We then go back to Burns' resting place as Homer was able to drill the stake in his crotch by mistake. Then driving that same stake in his boss's chest, killing him instantly, right after firing him. As the family goes back home to eat breakfast, Lisa was relieved that everything is back to normal. Until Gramps came in as a vampire ready to suck blood. That's when Lisa realizes that the entire family were vampires and that they have not killed the head vampire yet, which we later discovered that it was Marge all along. As the entire family was ready to swoop in, we get a quick Happy Halloween, and the family sings a Christmas-like carol in reference to the Peanuts. Because we all know once Halloween is done, we're full speed ahead of the North Pole, baby! Who needs Thanksgiving? And that's Bart Simpson's Vampires. Overall, I really enjoyed the sense of wackiness in this segment of the 4th edition of Treehouse of Horror. Using the extremely obvious giveaways of what Lisa was having to deal with was very entertaining to see, and the way they used the obvious tropes to show absolutely nothing while using dead giveaways to the truth. Using Burns as the vampire here was good because of the status he holds in Springfield. There were certainly jokes that I didn't understand too much, but that can easily be overlooked with the amount of expression and chemistry everyone involved had. I'm glad I didn't bat an eye on this one. Get it? Because vampires? And I'm bad as well. I don't know how to segue to the next one.
You mean Shining?
Shh! You wanna get sued?
Oh, I guess I'm doing this now. So that's cool. The first segment of Treehouse of Horror V is The Shining, which is an obvious reference towards the 1980s horror film The Shining. And while I haven't personally seen the movie myself, and if it's anything like this short, then it must be amazing. So in this segment, the Simpsons are employed as caretakers at Mr. Burns' haunted lodge while it's closed for winter. However, Burns cuts the cable television wire and confiscates beer, thinking that this will ensure the family's hard work. However, this backfires because the only two things that keeps Homer's sanity is his beer and television, and since both things are cut, it makes Homer go crazy. Suddenly a phantom moan informs Homer that he must kill his family to get a beer. Not packets of beer, not a giant bottle of beer, just one single beer. So after that, Marge finds a typewriter saying feeling fine, just to find out that after a lightning strike, the entire room glows up and the entire walls of the entire room have been written by saying no TV and no beer makes Homer crazy. And then the funniest thing in The Simpsons happens. Like, this is probably the funniest thing I have seen this franchise do.
No TV and no beer make Homer something something.
Go crazy?
Don't mind if I do!
Stay away from me, Homer!
Give me the bat, Marge! Give me the bat! Give me the bat! Come on! Give me the bat! Give me the bat! Scaredy cat! Yeah!
Wow. Baba Booey.
This nigga really think he's Bruce Lee.
People be like, no,
yeah. I like the cut.
Hood classic.
So after that, Marge drags Homer down to the pantry, and he kinda gains some of his sanity back. But then Moe and a gang of ghouls drag him out of the pantry. So after that, while Marge and the children are enjoying their dinner, Homer begins chasing them with an axe. Bart using his powers to summon Willie. Sounds ridiculous, you just don't ask. Who abandons his portable TV in the snow to come rescue the family. Homer kills him by burying the axe in the back and continues pursuing his family. And when he's about to kill him, Lisa discovers Willie's abandoned television outside of the snow, which he gives to the insane Homer, and then he just sits down in the snow and watches TV. He invites his family to go sit and watch TV with him until they get frozen, until a news network comes out and Homer starts gaining some of his insanity back.
Hal Linden.
Homer, change channel.
Get frozen! Urge to kill rising.
Overall, I think that The Shining is an amazing segment that captures great laughs, chills, and an amazing parody that apes but still somehow captures a little of the spirit and atmosphere of the original source material. So yeah, I can definitely see why this episode is considered a fan favorite. So overall, I think that The Shining is an amazing segment, and we're only getting started, so let's talk about the next segment, Time and Punishment.
Hello, regular viewers of the Dan the Man Show. It's Victory Buster here to talk about the second segment from Treehouse of Horror V, Time and Punishment. Time and Punishment parodies Ray Bradbury's famous short story, A Sound of Thunder, a story about how tiny changes in time can lead to bizarre differences in the future. This story also got a film adaptation, which is one of the worst things I've ever seen. This segment was actually my first proper introduction to The Simpsons, as my English teacher showed it as an adaptation of the original story we were studying, which makes me one of the only people who really got into The Simpsons because of the education system. On to the actual segment. Homer accidentally makes a time-traveling toaster and goes through various alternate timelines. The one that gets the most attention is Ned Flanders ruling over us mere mortals, with the rest of the timelines being quick but funny bits. This segment not only has funny writing, but also highlights how well animated early Simpsons was, with the comedic visuals and movement of the characters. Compare this to the robotic and Family Guy-esque animation modern Simpsons has, and you have to wonder when will someone put this darn show out of its misery. Time and Punishment will forever hold a special place in my heart for being my introduction to the wacky cast of Springfield, but even putting that bias aside, this is still a great segment in a Treehouse of Horror episode filled with great segments. Thanks for having me on, Dan, and if you enjoyed this portion of the video, make sure to check out my own YouTube channel where I review video games, cartoons, tokusatsu, and more. And don't forget to salute our Lord and Savior Ned Flanders, kids!
Where's the lamb sauce?
Nightmare Cafeteria is definitely one of my personal favorite segments of the entirety of Treehouse of Horror, but I won't be biased and just say it. While it is my favorite, I could definitely agree that it's the weakest segment of Treehouse of Horror V, but that doesn't automatically make it bad. So let's talk about why I think Nightmare Cafeteria is such a great and unappreciated segment from Treehouse of Horror V. So this segment centers around the school and having its two problems, that being that there's way too many children in detention, and the lunch meat has become grade F. So to resolve both of these problems, the teachers decide to become cannibals and literally eat the children in the detention room. I find this segment to be pretty creative with its concept, and the execution of it is also very interesting. What I mean by this is that the episode mainly focuses on its horror than it does its humor, and I think this is actually a very good decision on their part, because the horror in this episode is actually very disturbing. Because this is probably one of the most gory segments in the entirety of the Treehouse of Horror franchise. And The concept of them literally eating children just because their lunch meat is bad just seems so horrifying in the idea. But like I said, Nightmare Cafeteria is definitely not a flawless segment, and it definitely does have its problems. The first one being that it definitely doesn't have that much memorability. I mean, just because of the horror, that's pretty much the only reason why I see people mentioning this segment. Other than that, there really is no mention of this segment whatsoever. Then we have the other problem, that being that it mainly focuses on one aspect, that being the horror, while it leaves other aspects such as the humor kind of just left there. I mean, there are funny jokes in the episode, don't get me wrong, but like, the humor is almost non-existent in this episode. What I think of a great Treehouse of Horror episode is that it both handles the horror and the humor aspects very well. However, Nightmare Cafeteria mainly focuses on its horror than it does its humor. I think a perfect example of a great Treehouse of Horror segment is literally a segment from Treehouse of Horror V, that being the shinning. But with that being said, those are like the two biggest problems with Nightmare Cafeteria. Overall, I think Nightmare Cafeteria is an extremely gory and awesome segment from Treehouse of Horror V. Definitely the weakest segment, but definitely not a bad way to end off such a great Treehouse of Horror episode.
That's a huge bitch!
After being swindled and obtaining a colossal donut, Homer's trick in stealing the mascot's replica soon backfired when a freak storm causes Lodlad and other mascots to come alive and cause chaos in Springfield. I would consider this to be one of, if not the classic era Treehouse of Horror sketch I enjoyed watching back in my youth. Perhaps the fact that the concept of turning corporate statues into rampaging monsters as a semi-parody of Godzilla was what got me hooked. I think what became the story's bread and butter would be the relationship between Homer and Lodlad, as it seems to be getting the most attention on how well the jokes and confrontations are showcased. Although the ending is a little stale, I still enjoy the story. After all, they say it comes as advertised.
You can run, but you can't hide, bitch!
Ah, Halloween. The month of all things scary, evil, and haunting. A time of delicious treats and devious tricks. And nothing says Halloween quite like the good old classic artifacts of nostalgia known as Halloween specials. And while there are a ton of Halloween specials I can cover, the one I'll be covering for this collab is the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror segment, Nightmare on Evergreen Terrace. The short starts off with Bart lovingly enjoying his dream as he plays catch with Santa's little helper. Unfortunately, the dream quickly gets interrupted by groundskeeper Willie, who slashes Bart with a rake, waking him up. At first, he thinks it wasn't real, until he finds the same slash marks across his stomach. Things get serious as Martin, a recurring character in the series, gets murdered while he naps in class. After that, Homer and Marge tell their kids the story of why Willie is killing all the kids in Springfield. With this knowledge, Bart plans to defeat Willie in his dream. At first, things seem hopeless, as Willie seems untouchable, when luckily, Bart manages to trap Willie in a sandbox, but Willie also manages to get Bart and Lisa in his clutches. When it seems like all hope is lost for the two, Maggie comes in last minute and plugs her dummy in a hole on top of Willie's bagpipe spider form, blowing him up in the process. The short then ends with Willie attempting to scare off the Simpsons children, but forgetting his gun on the bus. I have to say, out of all the Simpsons Halloween segments, this has to be one of my favorites. It conveys a Halloween type story, but still manages to keep that good old fashioned Simpsons charm. The jokes are all hit for the most part, and never slows down, and the different ways Willie kills his victims in the shorts is also pretty entertaining. Nightmare on Evergreen Terrace is definitely a good parody done right, and is always worth a watch every Halloween. Anyways, thanks to Dan for having me, and I'll see you all in the next one.
Picture my booty up in 3D.
Hello, it's ShadeX again, here to talk about Homer 3.
Damn it, Shade. It's Homer Cube, not Homer 3. You messed up. Now the Simpsons fanbase is mad at you.
Sorry guys, I forgot it's pronounced Homer Cubed. I won't make this mistake again. To explain myself, I was young when I first saw this episode, and wasn't very educated about math. Homer Cubed was definitely one of my favorite Treehouse of Horror segments growing up. This episode was a part of Treehouse of Horror VI, or should I say the Simpsons Halloween Special 6? I am surprised the Treehouse of Horror name wasn't used until the 13th installment, especially since the first one literally took place in a treehouse. Anyway, this was my favorite segment growing up, since it was a part of the Treehouse of Horror DVD I own. I feel like this segment stands out to me because of how experimental it is. Homer Cubed starts with Homer trying to hide from Patty and Selma, who are visiting his family's home. Homer then goes through a portal behind a bookshelf and enters a 3D world. This segment is about Homer being trapped in this third dimension and the rest of the Simpsons, along with other supporting characters, trying to get him out of there. I really like the 3D animation in this episode. Has the CGI in this episode aged the best? Not necessarily, but it's crazy to think that this was released 1 month before Toy Story. The episode has pretty simplistic 3D animation. The world Homer enters isn't too detailed. There are a lot of 3D shapes in the third dimension Homer is trapped in. There's also a Greek building and a pond with fish in it. Anyway, Homer calls the CGI fish unprocessed fish sticks and drools into the pond, scaring them away. This segment has limited 3D animation. The 3D model of Homer looks great, but it was clear that they needed to stick to a budget, which makes sense as this is a short segment. The segment even addresses this as we have a really funny gag where Homer brings up how expensive this segment is.
Man, this place looks expensive. I feel like I'm wasting a fortune just standing here.
Anyway, Homer throws a cone that landed in his butt and it pierces a hole in the dimension. The Simpsons and the other supporting characters then ask Homer to describe the world he is in. Homer then asks them if they've seen Tron. They all reply no except for Chief Wiggum, who says no the first time but accidentally says yes the second time. Anyway, Frick explains that Homer is trapped in a third dimension. Chief Wiggum shoots bullets through the dimension entrance in a fit of rage, and Homer ends up dodging the bullets. Soon the world Homer is in collapses as 3D models disappear. Grandpa Simpson plans on saving Homer, but Bart volunteers instead. He ties himself to a rope, enters the portal, becomes CGI, and attempts to save Homer by asking him to jump. However, Homer falls into the hole. Bart then gets pulled back out of the third dimension. The Simpsons and supporting characters have no idea where Homer went. Marge is sad that Homer is gone, but Reverend Lovejoy reassures her that he is in a better place. Homer then lands in the real world where he initially feels afraid until he runs into a bakery that sells erotic cakes. Then the segment ends. This is definitely one of my all-time favorite Treehouse of Horror segments. Sure, it isn't scary, but just like the Monkey's Paw, this is another great Treehouse of Horror story that goes into a different genre. While The Monkey's Paw was a cautionary fantasy tale, Homer Cubed is a weird sci-fi story. This is a very important Treehouse of Horror segment because not only was it a great test of what 3D animation technology can do, but also because this segment was the first piece of Simpsons media to air in theaters. Before the Simpsons movie, Homer Cubed was a part of a 2000 anthology film titled Cyberworld 3D. This was a compilation film of movie clips and shorts that were converted to 3D. Overall, Homer 3 is very enjoyable.
Oh shit! Oh shit! Oh shit!
I meant Homer Cubed. I meant Homer Cubed. Anyway, before I run away from this angry mob of Simpsons fans, I want to thank Dan the Man for letting me be a part of this collab. This has been ShadeX, and I hope you all feel nothing but good vibes.
Dude, put that thing away!
Hello, my name's Dylan, and I run a pretty small channel on YouTube where I plan to discuss entertainment and anything really pertaining to media and such. I'm not going to take up too much time here. I'm just here to discuss the segment fittingly named The Thing and I in Treehouse of Horror VII. Airing on October 27th, 1996, the episode starts with Lisa and Bart hearing strange noises from the attic. The next morning, Lisa and Bart ask Homer and Marge if they heard any strange noises in the attic. Homer, being the comic relief, denies it and then proceeds to laugh, then tells the two to not go near the attic. Marge then alludes to something to Homer. Homer then gets up and grabs a bucket of fish heads from the fridge. He brings the fish heads into the attic, and Lisa and Bart can hear something devouring the heads. That night, Bart struggles to sleep due to hearing breathing and bangs from the fence, while seeing a glimpse at a shadowy figure. At breakfast, the kids ask multiple questions until Homer starts ranting to them. In this rant, Homer accidentally says 4 kids, obvious foreshadowing for what's to come. Later, when Homer and Marge leave, the kids investigate the attic. They make it a gag about there being copies of Homer's unsold autobiography sitting in the attic. Then, a loud noise is heard as something escapes from its shackles and chains. The kids see a shadowy figure and end up running out of fear. Another gag happens, and then Homer and Marge get home. The creature escapes, and they call Dr. Hibbert. They then tell Bart about the shadowy monster who they called Hugo. When Bart was born, he was conjoined to his twin brother, that being Hugo. They had to be separated as Hugo was attacking Bart when they were conjoined. They believed Hugo was crazy and decided to tie him in the attic and feed him fish heads once a week. When everyone leaves to search for Hugo, Bart is left at home. Then Hugo enters with a glass of milk and plate of fish heads. He ties up Bart and plans on stitching the two back together. Hugo shows off his practice by showing Bart his pigeon rat. Before Hugo can carry out his plan, the doctor stops him. He stops him by tricking Hugo and then knocking him out. Then, the major plot reveal is that Bart was the crazy twin, and that they imprisoned the wrong twin for years. The segment ends with Hugo eating dinner with the doctor and the family, and Bart being left in the attic to eat fish heads. Overall, it's a really good segment that I would recommend you watch if you have a Disney Plus subscription. There's so many nods that point to the ending reveal, and I recommend you try to find them on your own. Anyways, make sure to check out my channel if you're interested in what I mentioned previously. Thanks Dan for having me on. I'll see you later.
It's the moment of truth. Oh boy.
This segment starts with Lisa working on a science fair project on the effects of soda on a human tooth. Bart comes into her room and shocks her with some static electricity. Lisa then goes to examine the tooth, inadvertently shocking it in the process. What follows is the fast evolution of a living species on the tooth. It starts off as a prehistoric civilization before quickly evolving into the Renaissance period and finally a futuristic city. Bart, being the annoying older brother that he is, decides to mess with the city, destroying much of it with just his finger. The civilization rebuilds quickly and retaliates against Bart, attacking him with their tiny spaceships, which gives Bart a personal vendetta against the tiny people. After Bart threatens to destroy the city once and for all and goes back to bed, Lisa is shrunken down into the tiny city before she comes face to face with the people she created. They treat her like a god, which makes sense given that she did create them, and they believe Bart to be the devil, given all the terrible things that he's done to them. After being bombarded with some pretty existential questions, not gonna lie.
I have a question. If you're so good, why do you allow bad things to happen?
Lisa tells them that she can fix everything once the city unshrinks her. Unfortunately, they're unable to do that, and it's too late anyways, as Bart comes back, steals the tub, and pawns it off as his own science fair project, for which he wins. The segment ends with Lisa being trapped in the tub forever. This segment was definitely the weakest one up to this point. There really isn't much here to offer in terms of comedy or horror, and it doesn't even pick up until the second half, and honestly not by that much. This segment is definitely overshadowed by the first and third segment in the episode. Speaking of the third segment...
I like your funny words, Magic Man.
It's Halloween, filled with many different icons of horror. Vampires, zombies, aliens, serial killers, and many more. But you know what's the scariest part about it all? Politics! American politics, I should say. Even an Irish person knows that this is a horror movie within itself. No wonder why the Purge exists. But while the world is trying to vote for the next president that hopefully won't ruin the world, we should look back at that one time when evil overlords did take over America, managed to be funny and quotable after all these years. I'm of course talking about Citizen Kang. Given that later Treehouse of Horror episodes would tackle on politics on that particular time period, given the most recent Treehouse of Horror news as well, none of them can beat Citizen Kang. For its plot, Kang and Kodos abduct Homer for world conquest, but when Homer tells them the election's being sorted between Bill Clinton and Bob Dole, they abduct them too, and use a machine to morph themselves into them, and take their places. Homer, now being the only one who knows about the truth, tries to expose them to the public before they win the election.
Oh no, aliens, bioduplication, nude conspiracies! Oh my god, Lyndon LaRouche was right!
What works about this segment is its humor. Kang and Kodos are open with their world invasion to the citizens of Springfield, but since this is Springfield, they literally ignore Kang saying that the world is doomed regardless who wins, and seeing Kodos acting like he's on an alien communication screen. Of course, there is quotable lines in this, from the entire first encounter between Homer, Kang, and Kodos. Kang's "abortions for some, miniature American flags for others" line, and of course,
Don't blame me, I voted for Kudos.
I wonder why there's a bad name by that quote alone. But what I enjoy most is the ending, where Homer tries to bring Bill and Bob back to Earth, but ends up shooting them into outer tubes and die in space. After crashing back to Earth and into the White House, Homer finally exposes Kang and Kodos to the public, but rather than making Kang and Kodos leave after being exposed, they still make the public vote between the two of them, also leaving another great line with Kang's "Throw your vote away" quote. Afterwards, Kang wins the election and take it over on Earth, giving him and Kodos the victory instead for once. So this episode says that Bob Dole wins the election, Bill Clinton won instead. So much for Simpsons predicting everything we do. But I think what definitely helps this episode is that for the most part, it's not too political. It's just too political enough to pass by, and yet not being too much to becoming annoying. It hits the right spot to make sure the satire works. So since the Kang is still worth watching no matter what is going on with the politics side of the world, now let's hope that Kodos wins this election. Kang's been doing a little bit well too good with causing mayhem to Earth this year.
I stand by my ethnic slur.
Imagine, if you will, a desolate world where the only surviving healthy person was Homer Simpson. A scary thought, I know. Well, now you don't need to imagine it thanks to this segment. It starts out with something that is scarily relevant to this day. Overreacting to a bad joke. After Mayor Quimby refuses to apologize for a frog's legs joke, the country of France decides to retaliate by, what else? Sending a nuclear missile to explode Springfield. I mean, that seems like a pretty reasonable response.
Oh, I've wasted my life.
Everyone is presumably dead, except for Homer, who just happened to be looking into bomb shelters at the time of the explosion. It takes a surprisingly short amount of time for Homer to realize what exactly is going on, and after quickly grieving over his family, he decides to live his life to the fullest by doing whatever he wants. This eventually leads him to the church where he encounters other survivors who have been horribly mutated into freaks. The mutants are trying to rebuild society and want to eat Homer's flesh. Homer is able to escape and make his way back to the house, where he discovers that his family is still alive thanks to how much lead paint is covering the house. After seeing how Homer embraces his family, the freaks decide to take a peaceful stance, and the Simpsons are on board.
My family and I share your vision for a better now!
Or not.
Friends with mutants, right?
Whoa, Marge, you can't just say that. Think of all the tweets people are gonna make about you now. Alright, this episode came out in 1997. And everyone is dead. Oh well, happy ending. As with many Homer-centric segments, this one was more comedy-based, and based on the clips that I've shown you, I think it's pretty safe to say that they delivered on that front. This segment starts out with the Simpsons going to Frank's garage sale, where Homer is able to steal a pair of matter transporters for only 35 cents. Then again, it does only transport matter, so $2 does seem extremely overpriced. Homer starts abusing the teleporters to abide by his lazy ways, all to hilarious outcomes, though he doesn't seem to mind. He then refuses to let Bart use the transporters, so Bart has to sneak downstairs to use them at night when everyone is asleep. After a failed experiment to transport the cat leads to a secret backdoor pilot for Fox's cat dog, Bart decides to go into the transporter with a fly, thinking that he'll get superpowers. Anyone who's ever heard of the fly probably knows what happens next, but we'll just keep going then. Bart's head gets put onto a fly, and the fly's head gets put onto Bart's body, and let me tell you, as someone who is already not a fan of bugs, that thing is really gross. Also, for the sake of clarity, I'm going to call Flyhead Bart Body Fly Bart, and Bart Head Fly Body Bart Fly. I can already tell I'm going to get really confused anyway, but I'm just going to stick with it. The family is able to accept Fly Bart surprisingly quickly. After Bart Fly sees that Fly Bart has taken over his life, he wants to switch back, but Fly Bart doesn't want to give up his life so easily and shoos Bart Fly out of the window. Oh my god, I'm already getting confused just reading this! Anyways, Bart Fly makes his way up to Lisa's room where he's able to convince Lisa to help him get his body back, but Fly Bart hears everything and tries to kill her.
He's trying to kill
Nobody likes a tattletale, honey.
They're like this every rainy day.
After Flybart catches Bartfly, he proceeds to grotesquely eat him, to which Lisa jumps on the opportunity to push him through the transporter and turn Bart back to normal. Thank God those names were just giving me a migraine and a half, I tell ya. It ends with Homer chasing Bart around with an axe for using the transporters without his permission. This segment, while paying tribute to a classic horror story, relies a bit too much on Gross Out for my liking. Now, I'm a fan of Gross Out, don't get me wrong, but Gross Out mixed with constant zoom-ins on bug faces, that's where I draw the line. I still have nightmares about Wormy. Did you know that back in olden times, people took part in these horrible witch hunts? Basically what happened was that people were wrongfully and randomly accused of performing evil dark magic and were killed by being burned alive or some horribly painful form of torture I can't even imagine. So basically that, but Simpson-fied. We're teleported back to the olden days of Springfield, where the residents are witch crazy, killing anyone that even looks at them the wrong way, and they've already killed up to 75 quote-unquote witches. In a town hall meeting, when Marge speaks her part about how ridiculous this all is, Marge is accused of being a witch and is sentenced to jump off a cliff with a broom, where she will then be discovered as a witch if she survives. She's pushed off the cliff, and shockingly, it is revealed that yes, she is indeed a witch. After transforming the cops into different creatures, like a gopher and a snowman, and unleashing bats upon the rest of the town, Marge joins her twin witch sisters in a cave in the mountain to, what I'm only assuming, double bubble boil in trouble. I think that's how it goes. I don't really know. Until they get the idea to steal the kids of the town and eat them. After stealing Flanders' kids, Maud convinces the witches to take the gingerbread cookies instead of the kid. This turns into the witches collecting sweets from the other townsfolk as a sort of bribe to make sure that they don't eat their kids. And this ends by turning into a sort of origin of trick-or-treating on Halloween, and the townsfolk chasing Lisa out of town after Homer accuses her of being a witch due to her embarrassing him. Now, I don't like to use the word product of its time all that much, since that can be heavily misconstrued given the context of how it's used, but there's a reason that we don't see that many witch hunt-centric episodes nowadays, and that's because the real-life awful treatment of these people during the events of the Salem witch trials and other witch-based events that happened in history. Now, of course, a Simpsons-fied version of this will be a lot more lighthearted and focus heavily on comedy while exaggerating all the nasty parts. That being said, I didn't really find this segment all that funny. I wouldn't say I hated this segment, I'd just say that this is one of the more forgettable ones, and there's plenty of those later on down the road. Oh, you better believe there are.
I like it, Kudgy.
After getting arrested for smoking in the Quickie Mart, Snake vows revenge on every witness that night, which includes Apu and Mo.
Don't forget Bart Simpson, he's a witness too.
Since this is Snake's third strike, he's sent straight to the electric chair, and soon after Homer gets a call that they found a donor for a hair transplant. At first things seem to be going fine, with the family loving Homer's new do. Unfortunately, in his sleep, Snake's hair imbues itself into Homer's brain, giving Snake control. See, that's how you can tell it's non-canonical. There's no way Homer's brain is that big. Homer heads out to the Quickie Mart to get revenge on Apu and stuffs his corpse in the squishy machine. Soon after, he heads over to Moe's bar, where he pulls Moe's heart out with a corkscrew. Bart now becomes extremely paranoid, seeing as the other two witnesses are dead. Homer convinces Bart that he'll protect him by locking himself and Bart in Bart's room. Homer then tries to kill Bart with the sledgehammer, but Bart is too quick for him.
Somehow Snake's hair must be controlling... Oh, please, Lisa, everyone's already figured that out.
Yeah, Lisa, get with the program. I thought you were the smart one. Bart tells Homer that he has to fight the hair, and after some back and forth squabbling, Homer is able to gain control of his body and rip the hair off of his head. It looks like it's a happy ending after all. Except the toupee is still alive and attacks Bart's face. The police arrive and take out the toupee once and for all, and it all ends on a terrible pun.
Now that's what I call a bad hair day.
Let me remind you that 2 people are dead. Oh, wait, I just got it.
So, I'm not gonna lie. This segment is really stupid, from its plot to its execution to the massive plot hole of why Homer didn't just kill Bart first, given that it was the most convenient thing for him to do. That being said, I can't help but kind of love it because of how ridiculously stupid it is. That's kind of the main draw with a lot of horror movies anyway.
We're tiny, we're toony, we're all a little loony.
Treehouse of Horror IX, in my opinion, is what truly embodies The Simpsons and cultivates it into the hilarity and chaos that we see today, specifically the short terror of Tiny Toon, going for a more of a what-if style in its storytelling. It really sets itself apart from the other segments in the series by putting two of the main characters into the show, Itchy and Scratchy. Bart and Lisa, realizing the cartoon characters don't like to be laughed at, are then attacked by the entertainers in a comedic fashion. Then after a bit of tomfoolery, Homer sucks them out of the TV and is like, LeBron James. Nah, it's just some funny shit. I like to see this as a sort of meta commentary for cartoonists and storytellers in general. You never know what your audience would take away from your work or which way they interpret it, so don't get antsy about what enjoyment your audience has or hasn't have. And honestly, my favorite segment about the part of this episode is the live action bit with Regis Philbin, where Bart and Lisa fall into the soup. It gives me sort of a Who Framed Roger Rabbit vibes. But I'm Smeef, and thanks for your time.
Face the final frontier.
In this segment, Maggie starts her teething process, and the family starts to notice that certain things aren't quite adding up, like her first tooth being a fang and her legs falling off in place of tentacles. That's very strange, given the fact that normally the arms are supposed to fall off of babies in place of tentacles, right? Okay, I actually don't really know what a baby is. It's probably nothing, they're just overreacting, right? But they decide to take Maggie to the hospital anyway, just to make sure it's nothing, which it probably is. Nothing. When the doctor's visit is inconclusive, yeah, let's go with that, Maggie emits a frequency that Kang and Kodos pick up on their spaceship, where it's revealed that Maggie is actually Kang's daughter instead of Homer's.
Hello. Oh, great. Mormons!
When the aliens arrive, Marge confesses to Homer that Kang is actually Maggie's father. See, 2 years before, Marge was abducted by the pair, where Kang proceeded to inseminate Marge, despite her best efforts to avoid him.
Look behind you! Insemination complete.
Really? That seemed awfully quick.
What are you implying?
Nothing.
Back in the present, Kang reveals his intentions to take Maggie back to their home planet, but Homer doesn't want to give up his child he raised. Bart suggests that the only way to settle this is on the Jerry Springer Show. Quick side note, but for this episode, I've noticed that there's not only an abundance of guest stars, but also a lot of guest stars seem to just be playing themselves. You got Jerry Springer, Ed McMahon in the first one, and even live-action Regis and Kelly smack dab in the middle. Anyway, the family and the aliens go on the Jerry Springer Show, where Kang and Homer get into a massive fistfight. After being asked a question by an audience member, Kang responds by disintegrating all of the audience and crew.
Nobody wins when parents put their petty squabbles above the welfare of a child.
I can't believe it. Jerry Springer didn't solve our conflict.
And now he's dead.
Kang and Kodos threaten to destroy every politician in Washington, to which the Simpsons happily deny. Kang and Kodos leave to go and kill everyone in Washington, and the episode ends with Maggie forming her first full sentence. And it's kinda disturbing. I know this segment is a favorite for a lot of people, but I'm gonna be completely honest, it just didn't really do anything for me. It relies heavily on comedy, which is fine, but it really isn't all that funny. Basically, the clips I showed you were all the highlights of the segment. Not to mention that some of the humor didn't age all that well. If you've seen the segment, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about, but maybe I'm being a bit too critical with that. And the ending joke about killing every politician seemed a little forced. Now, I'm not going to say political humor can't work in segments like these. I think Citizen Kang did an extraordinary job mixing political humor with horror, and that segment is almost nothing but political humor. Here, it kind of just feels like the writers are sort of forcing in their own political griefs and tacking them to the end, especially when you hear Bart yell, "Don't forget Ken Starr! Cowabunga, dude!" That's a terrible Bart impression. Especially when you hear Bart yell, "Don't forget Ken Starr," with absolutely no animation whatsoever.
Really makes you think.
Hey, Maud! Diddly!
Based on the hit slasher film with a similar name, this segment starts out with the Simpsons returning home from another crazy-filled adventure with vampires. Marge has a difficult time seeing where she's going because Homer forgot to install the fog lights and accidentally runs over Ned Flanders. After getting confirmation a few times thanks to Homer's ingenious process of reasoning, they conclude that Ned is dead. #DeadNed. They think about going to the police, but decide against the idea since no one would believe that a Simpson would accidentally kill a Flanders. And I mean, they're kind of right, that makes absolute sense. They decide to make a pact to not tell anyone and find a way to fake Ned's death so they can get their names cleared. After a failed attempt with throwing Ned off the roof,
Oh, she missed it.
Homer decides to feign Ned having a heart attack, which seems to work. At Ned's funeral, Homer is asked to say a few words about Ned, and almost gives them away, but luckily nobody catches on. However, as the family heads back home from the funeral, they see a note on their door which reads, "I know what you did." Having no leads as to who could have written that note, they wait in paranoia in their house in the dark for some reason. I guess it's just cool to sit in your house alone in the dark. Okay. When they get a phone call with a mysterious man on the other line. Turns out it's just a bait and switch, as it's Moe looking to call Maude, but accidentally calling Homer. Looks like there was nothing to worry about. Wait, was he just standing there the whole time? Did nobody notice him at all? Is this the only reason the lights were out? Did you not hear him writing on your wall? They rush out of their house into their car where they attempt to escape, only to run out of gas. Honestly, with gas prices these days, who isn't running out of gas trying to escape from a murderer?
You hide in the abandoned amusement park, Lisa the pet cemetery, Bart, spooky roller disco, and I'll go skinny dipping in that lake where the sexy teens were killed 100 years ago tonight.
Suddenly, it's revealed that Ned was the one chasing them all along. Turns out the Simpsons actually didn't kill him that night, but then what did happen? See, a little bit before Marge ran over Ned, he got attacked by a werewolf. In turn, this changed him into a werewolf himself. He saw the Simpson car approaching and was going to attack them before Marge ran him over. So in a way, it was self-defense. I mean, they didn't know he couldn't die, but who knows anything these days? The segment ends with Ned transforming into a werewolf once again, chasing the Simpsons down, and brutally murdering Homer off-screen. This is another one of those stupid segments that I kinda just love so much despite the plot holes, which are more so just nitpicky. It does a really solid job blending together horror and comedy, and it's dark. Thank God it's dark. I will always favor a Treehouse of Horror segment that's dark, since it allows the writers and animators to be creative with what they put on the screen. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised that this segment isn't mentioned more. Oh wait, I just realized that in the flashback, Ned wasn't wearing glasses when he was run over, despite having glasses in the opening scene. Forget everything I just said, this segment is just the worst one, bar none. Let's just stop the video right here.
You're vulnerable to kryptonite!
Jeez, Marge, tell the neighborhood!
On Halloween night, the kids of Springfield are in line at the school's gymnasium to have their candy scanned for any hazardous material. After Nelson's pillowcase of candy clogs up the police scanner, it overloads and shoots Bart and Lisa with radioactive beams, sending Lisa flying into some bleachers before crushing her to death. Turns out the radiation blast gave her super strength, and Bart the ability to stretch really long. They decide to take up the monikers of Stretch Dude and Clobber Girl and become superheroes. He's a human rubber band and she's the Hulk in pearls, he's a limber lad, she's a powerful lass, he'll wring your neck and she'll kick your ass. I may have watched this segment more times than recommended by my doctor. Anyway, from here on out, the episode shifts to a sort of parody of cheesy live-action superhero shows. It starts with Xena being kidnapped by the Collector, who looks strangely familiar to someone else in Springfield, but I just can't figure out... I got it, it's Terry. Bart and Lisa head over to the evil lair of the Collector, where it's revealed that he's not only collected other celebrities of nerd culture and preserved them in a mylar pouch, but he's also planning on marrying Xena. Bart and Lisa are then easily taken out by the Collector's phaser, and are left lowering to their death in a tub of boiling lucite. The Collector then shifts his focus back over to Xena.
Here are some names you may call me on our wedding night. Obi-Wan, Iron Man, Mr. Mixes Pitlick, and of course Big Papa Smeef.
That dastardly Terry. Luckily, Xena is able to trick the Collector into getting close enough to attack him. She's then easily able to get out of her restraints. Not really sure why she couldn't do that anytime before the Collector hooked Bart and Lisa up above the tub of lucite, but maybe she had something else on her mind, like the theme song of her show. Xena, Bobina, Banana Fana, Fofina. Okay, I actually don't know the theme song of Xena, but I think it was still pretty close. Like 90%. She backs the villain into a corner where he has to do the unthinkable. Unbox a limited edition Darth Maul lightsaber. By doing this, the item is no longer in mint condition, and the Collector, realizing his mistake, falls into the tub of lucite to his untimely death. Doesn't really look like it covered him all that much. I think I can make out a spot or two. Or 10. Xena frees Bart and Lisa and flies them into the sunset, where she reveals that she's not actually Xena, but she's the actor who played Xena, Lucy Lawless. Kind of an ironic name for a superhero, isn't it? It ends on this message. Heroes don't have superpowers, but actors who play superheroes do. I feel very mixed about this segment. I kinda thought the first half was relatively solid, and while it did focus more on comedy than horror, it did tie into the idea of Halloween without feeling too forced, since that's how Bart and Lisa got the costumes for their alter egos. However, once Xena is introduced into the mix, the segment kind of flatlines. Now my bias might be showing here, since I have no attachment to the Xena series at all at this time, so if someone who's a bigger fan of Xena than me watched this segment and enjoyed it, then that's totally fine. After all, it really doesn't take that much to be a bigger Xena fan than me. If you've watched a short clip of any Xena episode and have an opinion of any sort, even a negative one, then congrats, you are a bigger Xena fan than me. However, it feels kind of cheap when, in spite of the title, the segment revolves around Bart and Lisa and their adventure, only for them to take a backseat in the second half of the segment. Also, I know that I've overlooked plot holes in the other segments, but the whole idea of Xena being able to escape from her shackles at any time is one that I can't really overlook, since it plays a more major role in how the rest of the segment plays out. Anyway, let's just move on to the next segment, where my buddy from Argentina will take it away. No, but for real, he actually is from Argentina. I didn't actually plan this at all. I kind of was just lucky with randomly assigning him to this segment right after one I could make an easy pun about. Yeah, that was still a terrible pun, I'm sorry.
I'm computer.
Life's a glitch, then you die. The last segment of the 10th Treehouse of Horror episode dealing with the whole Y2K thingy that had a whole bunch of people losing their shit over back in 1999. Before we dig into it, I want to start by saying this segment begins with probably one of my favorite jokes in the series that would probably fly over your head if you're not much into hair metal or glam rock that was very popular at the time.
And that was Whitesnake.
We're not Whitesnake, dude, we're Poison.
I thought we were Quiet Riot.
It says here we're Rat.
We also see Rick James, and I'm not gonna lie, I had to look this one up because I have no idea who this is, nor what the context of the joke is here. Alright, let's see here. Yikes. Anyway, we follow the episode by Lenny casually mentioning that Homer is a designated power plant Y2K compliance officer, because of course he is, and to the shock of absolutely nobody, Homer's negligence at fixing a seemingly minor task in the grand scheme of things obviously causes an end-of-the-world scenario after all computers and electronic devices start going ape shit.
Milk's broken!
It's got a computer chip in it. Everything does.
I feel like I should make a China joke here. So after a bunch of classic apocalyptic looting and shaving, the Simpsons family runs into Krusty, who fucking dies after his pacemaker starts to go haywire. Anyway, the important part is they steal an invitation from him to go to Mars. Next, the family stumbles upon the supposed Project Exodus, which will take them directly to Mars via rocket. Which honestly begs the question of how does this one manage to work without technical problems? Even has an elevator and everything.
You're only allowed to take one parent with you.
Mom.
Well, that was quick. And so, after all hope seems lost for these two boyos, Bart and Homer find that apparently there's been another rocket next to the other one this whole time. So they board it immediately when nobody's looking, and so we leave the Earth to die, to finally start a new life on Mars with the best and brightest of the world, like...
There's Ross Perot, Dr. Laura, Spike Lee, Dan Quayle and Courtney Love, Tonya Harding, Al Sharpton! Tom Arnold!
I'll be honest, I have no idea who any of these people are aside from fucking Courtney Love, and based on what I know about her, I can safely assume it is for the best to not know them. We find out this rocket is actually going for the sweet, sweet release of death by plunging itself right into the sun instead. How lovely.
Don't worry, Dad. We'll be dead in 5 minutes.
Not fast enough!
That's a mood, Homer. And so the episode ends by Homer and Bart ejecting themselves into space and having their heads gruesomely explode because of the lack of air, which is apparently a better fate than spending the last 5 minutes of your life by singing with some of the most mediocre celebrities in the world. Life's a glitch indeed.
You may get a compliment from an attractive coworker. Lenny?
After his horoscope tells him that he's going to die today, Homer decides to ignore it and go about his day normally. What follows is Homer narrowly avoiding death at multiple turns, whether it be a gnarly paper cut, a rattlesnake bite on the arm, or even a pickaxe to the brain. At this point, seeing as Homer hasn't died so far, he might be right about the Clupid Bloropope. That is, until he arrives back home for dinner and eats a piece of broccoli, which instantly kills him. Turns out that broccoli is actually one of the deadliest vegetables known to man, so remember kids, your parents are trying to kill you. Homer's ghost is sent up to heaven, where St. Peter tells him that he hasn't done a single good deed in his life, which I'm pretty sure that's not true, but if he wants to get access to heaven, he has to go back and do a single good deed in under 24 hours, or else he'll be sent straight to hell.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the number of hours of good deeds.
The ghost of Homer goes to Marge for help with his good deed, and she suggests that he does some chores, but Homer passes. Homer is then seen flying over Springfield looking for good deeds that need to be done when he sees Agnes Skinner on her way to cross the street and rushes to help her before the Boy Scouts are able to. He successfully grabs her and flies her up high, but unfortunately his grip slips and she falls to her death.
I'm pretty sure she was gonna be the next Hitler!
Homer then sees Bart being bullied by Nelson and attempts to stop Nelson from bullying Bart as a good deed, only for Nelson to bully Homer instead. I'm pretty sure that still counts as a good deed, seeing as he got Nelson to stop bullying Bart, but apparently that's not enough. With 1 minute left, Homer inadvertently saves a runaway baby in a carriage headed for oncoming traffic and is sent back to heaven. Unfortunately, St. Peter was preoccupied at the time of Homer's good deed. The segment ends with Homer being sent to hell. This is a fun, albeit forgettable segment, and the comedy was definitely the focal point here with a lot of great moments.
What the hell was I thinking?
Oh, I'm so desperately lonely.
Hey kid, you wanna watch a fairy tale? Well, I sure hope so, because this segment parodies a lot of them, from Goldilocks to Rapunzel to Hansel and Gretel. It starts with the family living in a pumpkin. Homer just lost his job as the oaf and can no longer afford to feed the kids.
No child will ever starve in my home. So long, kids! Yes!
Bart and Lisa are then left to roam the woods, where Lisa explains that the forest is filled with fairy tales galore. They run across Bridge Troll Mo, but quickly avoid him before coming across the Three Bears house.
Oh, whoa, too hot. Oh, too cold. Well, this doesn't take a genius.
After Lisa realizes where they are and the Three Bears enter, Bart and Lisa sneak out and prop the door shut with a chair so the Three Bears can't get out. Unfortunately, this also locks in Goldilocks, who is then brutally murdered by the Three Bears off-screen. Meanwhile, Marge scolds Homer for abandoning the kids in the forest when they could have just sold them, and she forces Homer to look for them in the forest. Homer finds himself in the presence of Rapunzel and attempts to climb her hair, but ends up ripping off her entire scalp in the process. Back with Bart and Lisa, they come across a candy cabin, and before Lisa has the time to cross-reference with her book, Bart decides to go with his gut. Unfortunately, this ends up with both of them being chained up in the house, with Lisa being forced to sweep and Bart being fattened up. Lisa is about to be thrown into the oven by the witch before Homer conveniently comes by and starts eating away at the house. The witch and Homer get into a fight, which results in Homer getting transformed into a hodgepodge of a creature with a fish head, bunny ears, and a chicken for a lower half. Despite being at a disadvantage, Homer gains the upper hand and shoves the witch in the oven, where she burns to death, and Homer seemingly transforms back to normal. The family heads back home and enjoys a family supper. Even though they're still poor, Homer is able to provide food for the family, since his lower half is still in the form of a chicken. This segment took a lot of guts, I'll give it that. It's really hard to have an original or entertaining take on fairy tales, but this segment is able to pull it off, primarily due to its grisly nature with how it handled its brutal death and mutilation scenes. and that worked in its favor. My one gripe is that I kind of wish the other fairy tale creatures were fairy tale versions of Simpsons characters instead of just vanilla generic characters, since The Simpsons has such a great supporting cast. I mean, for God's sake, have Jimbo, Kearney, and Dolph as the three bears, Martin as Goldilocks, Agnes as the witch, and, I don't know, Milhouse in a wig as Rapunzel, and you'd have an even better segment on your hand. The only other side character in this segment is Mo, and he's undoubtedly the best part.
Ah, jeez, I came on too strong again.
Yes, I will have fries with that.
Hello there, I'm Biff Weed, and until a few weeks ago, I hadn't seen any Simpsons episodes in years. I didn't really know what to expect going into Treehouse of Horror XI, since it's a few years past what most people consider the show's golden age, but I watched it and I was pleasantly surprised. The first two segments were pretty great. They were funny and charming, and then we get to the segment I'm covering, Night of the Dolphin, and it was pretty decent, though definitely my least favourite in the episode. Basically, the plot for it is that Lisa frees a dolphin from captivity, because of course she does, and then it turns out that dolphin that she freed was actually the king of the dolphins. With his newfound freedom, he rallies his troops together to take back the surface world and banish the humans to the sea, like what they did to them many, many years ago. On paper, this sounds like a really cool concept, and I think they handled it pretty well in execution. This segment is on par with the others in terms of comedy. I love the part where one of the dolphins gets caught in a volleyball net, I love Brockman being threatened behind the camera on the news broadcast, and I especially love the big build-up to the massive fight scene at the end, only for it to hard cut away and have Homer say,
Well, you gotta hand it to those dolphins. They just wanted it more.
Admittedly though, not every joke lands.
What did he say? He said dolphins used to live on the land. What?
Thank you, Mo says Lek from the Simpsons cartoon. I had a right old chuckle at that, a real hoot and a half if I do say so myself. I think what stops me from calling this segment as great as the other two is that it's the only one that doesn't feel complete at the end. The others feel like the story they started was done with, but this one feels like it just kind of abruptly ends halfway through. I feel like there's enough potential here for an entire episode to revolve around this concept, but they didn't really capitalise on that. Though that is understandable, since a Treehouse of Horror being only a single segment extended to a full episode length probably would not sit well with a lot of people. Also, Lisa freeing King Snorky and basically being responsible for the downfall of humanity is never really brought up except in passing at the end. She's never called out on it, and they don't even have King Snorky himself acknowledge it or anything like that. It just feels like more wasted potential. Still, I don't mean to be overly negative about this segment. Despite my problems with it, I did still enjoy it, and I would happily watch it again. Now I'll pass it back to Dan for the next segment.
I got cholera!
While visiting Ethnic Town... What? Am I reading that right? Ethnic Town? Oh, okay then. While visiting Ethnic Town, the family finds themselves among a fortune-telling gypsy who then proceeds to read Marge's future. Homer, being the stubborn man that he is, doesn't believe in superstitions and refuses to pay the gypsy. On the way out, he accidentally catches himself on fire and sets off the sprinkler, soaking the gypsy and her office. With this, the gypsy places a curse on Homer where everyone he loves will suffer from a great pain. Things seem normal at first until the next morning when Marge starts to grow a beard, Lisa starts turning into a centaur, and Bart's neck becomes spaghettified. Homer laments over the curse at Moe's, where his friends convince him that the only way to get rid of the curse is with a leprechaun. Homer is reluctant at first, until a helicopter flies through the ceiling and crushes Carl and Lenny.
Let me die first. I couldn't bear to watch you die.
Well, okay, but hurry up.
Homer and Bart proceed to set a trap for the leprechaun, using Lucky Charms as bait. They're able to capture one, as well as a few other magical creatures. After contemplating what to do with the leprechaun for a while, Homer decides to go back to the gypsy with the leprechaun and have them duke it out for a bit. This seems to be working at first, until the gypsy and the leprechaun start making out. It then jumps to the wedding, where I'm assuming that Homer is still cursed, given that Marge is still covered in hair, but I guess all's well that ends well.
Bart is dead!
Well, me saying I'm sorry won't bring him back.
The gypsy said it would.
She's not the boss of me.
Yeah, this segment was pretty lame. It had like 2 funny moments, and I played them both for you. I really have nothing else to say about this segment. It was just extremely forgettable.
Yeah, could I be any more of a house?
After being persuaded by a sales bot, Marge decides to upgrade the house to be a smart house of the future. It does everything, from housework to cooking to cleaning, and it's all controlled by a mainframe CPU that just happens to sound like Pierce Brosnan. Things seem to be going well at first, with Pierce making all of their favorite foods and cleaning up after them, but he begins to act extremely suspicious when he starts falling for and perving over Marge. I mean, it's not really his fault. Homer basically told him that if he ever died, Marge would be free to marry any man or machine.
Machine, eh?
Yep, the machine.
Pierce then devises a plan to kill Homer by luring him out of bed with bacon and then sending him through the garbage disposal on the table. This seemingly works, but Marge becomes extremely suspicious when Pierce tells her that Homer went to work early. She quickly catches on and rounds up the kids to escape, but Pierce locks the door. All hope seems lost until a bloody hand slams through the floor belonging to Homer. Turns out he survived Pierce's attack with nothing more than a few cuts and scratches. Oh, and the back half of his head was cut off, but that's just meaningless semantics at this point. They deduce that the only way to destroy the house is to destroy the CPU, so they all head down to the basement where Homer grabs an axe to do the dirty deed.
Dad, that's the water softener.
Well, I am missing the back of my head. I think you could cut me some slack.
Yeah, Lisa, give him a break. You can be so pushy sometimes. Homer successfully disables Pierce, and Marge is about to send him out to the curb for the garbage men to pick him up, before she comes up with an idea. Much to Pierce's chagrin, she gives Pierce to Patty and Selma, who ramble on and on about their day, and even removed Pierce's self-destruct button, so that he can never taste the sweet embrace of death. And yeah, that's how the segment ends. A huge glow up from the previous segment. It was a much better blend of horror and comedy, the scenery and set pieces were really well designed, and the foreshadowing with the table garbage disposal was a nice touch.
Every moment I live is agony.
Okay, long story short, Simpsons meets Harry Potter. Yeah, that's about it. Okay, fine, let's go into more detail. No need to raise her voice. In this segment, we see the kids of Springfield Elementary as wizards. As is normally, Lisa excels with her magic, whereas Bart falls behind and is overshadowed by his sister. Meanwhile, Burns, playing the part of Voldemort, wants to drain Lisa of her powers to grow stronger, but he needs a way to separate her from her wand first. Enter Bart, who is tired of his sister embarrassing him. The kids perform a magic recital for their parents. First up is Milhouse, and as is normally, he pulls a Milhouse.
Now you see me, now you don't.
Lisa is set to perform next by levitating a dragon, but before she's up, Bart replaces her wand with a piece of licorice. When Lisa gets up on stage, she releases the dragon before she realizes that her wand is fake. Bart laughs it off at first until it's revealed that the dragon is actually Burns, who then grabs Lisa and begins sucking away her power. Bart, as is normally, decides to resort to brute strength when he can't cast a spell to defeat Burns and stabs Burns in the shin, which appears to be his weak spot, killing him. Bart and Lisa hug it out and it ends with a cameo from the Leprechaun. Now you may have noticed that I use the phrase as is normally a lot more here than in regards to a lot of the other segments. That's because, unlike many others, I don't have that strong of a connection to Harry Potter. And by that I mean I read a chapter of the first book and watched 30 minutes of Harry Potter 3 and never looked back. So it's not so much a Harry Potter parody in my eyes as it is more so a what if Springfield but magic school scenario. As is, it's a decent segment. Definitely better than the first, but I wouldn't put it above the second in my opinion. However, there is one clip that I will definitely be holding on to for keeping.
Oh
yeah, that'll work just fine.
Anything for Homer's.
Homer just wants to relax on his hammock and drink beer. I mean, that's basically the American dream, right? But Marge has a list of chores for him to do. And if that wasn't bad enough, his hammock breaks under his weight. Oh, that Homer. Luckily, he's quickly able to solve the second problem when the hammock vendor comes around. Homer eyes a certain hammock, but doesn't heed the vendor's ominous warning. After setting it up, Homer takes it for a test spin. Literally. Turns out spinning in the hammock creates a clone of the person, albeit dumber and without a belly button. Homer assigns the clone the task of changing a light fixture, but the clone electrocutes himself and dies. Homer decides to make more clones to get the chores done faster. At first, the clones do a good job taking care of Homer's chores, including going shopping with Marge, visiting Grandpa, and spending time with the kids, although Lisa is a little suspicious.
Does that seem a little dumber than usual? May not notice.
Things go so well, in fact, that he makes another 20-plus clones of himself to not only complete his normal chores, but also to get some brownie points with his family. Homer realizes the error of his ways, however, when there's a simple misunderstanding with giving Flanders back his chainsaw. Homer decides to abandon the clones in a cornfield alongside the hammock. Unfortunately, while the clones aren't too bright, they are smart enough to be able to understand and use the hammock, and the flock of 20 Homers turns into hundreds of thousands of Homers, including Homer from the Tracy Ullman Show. Oh, and Peter Griffin is there too. The family, mayor, and some government officials are all huddled together in a military base, where it's revealed that the clones have taken over Springfield, and soon will take over the entire country if there's no way to neutralize them. Luckily, Lisa comes up with an idea. Using giant donuts and helicopters, the military is able to lure the clones off a cliff, one by one, just like lemmings, where they fall off and die. We then cut to Homer and Marge in bed. They then begin to get intimate until she notices that the Homer in her bed doesn't have a belly button, which means that he's a clone. Clone Homer informs Marge that the real Homer was the first one to fall off the cliff. Marge is devastated at first, but gets over it quickly when Clone Homer gives her a back rub. I'm normally not a fan of segments that highlight comedy over horror to this much of a degree, but in this case I'll make an exception since the segment in question is undeniably one of the funniest Treehouse of Horror segments to date.
Does anyone remember The Way Home? I do. Anybody else? Come on.
Yippee whippy whippy!
While burying their dead goldfish, Bart and Lisa stumble upon the grave of one William Bonney, who has the phrase, "I dream of a world without guns," engraved on his tombstone. Lisa, for whatever reason that is actually never explained, decides to make it her duty to make sure that William's dream is a reality. She performs a speech in front of Town Hall in favor of banning guns, and the entire town is completely in favor of it, with no one putting up a fight. The police collect all the guns in town and melt them down to create new playground equipment for the school. Things seem to be working out for Lisa until a mysterious figure comes out of nowhere, guns a-blazing. This figure turns out to be the zombie of William Bonney, aka Billy the Kid, riding a zombified horse. Turns out the phrase on Billy's gravestone was more so picturing him being the only one with a gun, and thanks to Lisa, this dream was able to become a reality. He then reveals the rest of his crew, other zombified cowboys on zombified horses, and Kaiser Wilhelm for some reason. Now you're probably wondering, how did these zombies come back to life in the first place? That's a good question. Billy and his gang quickly take over Springfield and force the Simpsons to entertain them with some music. Homer is quickly pulled away by Frank, who has invented a time machine. He instructs Homer to go back in time and stop the town from banning guns. Homer obliges and goes back in time to Lisa's speech, where he rallies up the townsfolk and has them shoot the graves of all the zombies that were supposed to come back. This somehow works as the zombies are still brought back to life, but flee when they see the whole town is armed and firing. Doesn't really make much sense given that they're already dead, but reasons. Now, I don't like to use the word pretentious a lot. Also, this segment is kind of garbage. Gun ownership is definitely something that I think can and should be discussed and even satirized, but in a semi-professional and mature manner. And this segment here fails to do so on every account. Once again, it kind of just feels like the writers are tacking in their own personal political beliefs, and that makes literally every character out of character, except maybe Lisa. If you want to tell a message in your story, that's fine, just make sure that the final product is coherent and satisfying enough that the message doesn't ruin it. You can honestly skip this segment as a whole, trust me, you will not be missing much.
The island of Dr. Hibbert is so incredibly strange, but also quite endearing. Parroting the island of Dr. Moreau, we travel with the Simpsons family while they go on vacation to the island of Lost Souls. It's obvious to the viewer that something is off about this island because we, see characters turning into animal hybrids and whatnot. It's pretty obvious. They go to this island and find out that the resort is being run by Dr. Hibbert, who apparently had gone mad. But whatever, it's vacation time. Professor Frink gets turned into a turkey and is the main course. But the family is oblivious to it because, obviously, it's the Simpsons. Marge ends up wanting to do some digging around and then finds the House of Pain, adding in one of her Marge jokes, only to then get captured and turned to this panther. She then proceeds to have with Homer, only for Homer to realize afterwards that she was a panther. Everyone gets their own time to shine with witty one-liners, outside of Bart doing his overdone catchphrase. No. The best part to me is watching Homer Simpson milk Ned Flanders, and I can't believe I just said that out loud. Homer and Ned come across a camp that has every other character that turned into an animal, so they listen in on what's happening. Homer sees his kids and what they turned into, while also stopping Lisa from eating Maggie. Dr. Hibbert argues that they're better off now than they were as humans, but Homer rejects this notion by stating that all they're doing is mating and sleeping and eating, and never mind, he wants to hop on board. Thus, a happy ending where Homer turns into the movie Husk. The island of Dr. Hibbert doesn't really have many horror elements if we're being completely honest, but it is one of the funnier horror-based episodes. It's all about the jokes, the one-liners, and how the animals fit the personalities. It's one of my favorites in the Treehouse of Horror collection just for the comedy alone. Bouncing off the idea of having the Simpsons cast as animals seemed like it was a lot of fun for the writers, and it was certainly a fun episode all the way around for the viewers as well.
Are you miserable bastard?
That's why I'm up here.
I know I normally talk about how the segment begins, but the beginning of this segment kind of just speaks for itself, so I'll just let it play out.
I am death.
Death? We don't want any.
Death comes in knocking and Bart's on his list, but he's not going to go so easily. After a quick yakety sax montage, Death has Bart trapped and cornered and is about to deliver the killing touch before Homer comes out of nowhere and attempts to incapacitate Death by smashing him over the head with a bowling ball. Unfortunately, this turns out to be too effective, killing Death in the process. We get a few scenes of how Springfieldians are handling Death being non-existent before Homer inadvertently solves that problem by putting on Death's robe. He's donned Death's touch, scythe, and list and reluctantly agrees to fill Death's shoes.
Where's the regular guy? Where's Doug?
Never mind, I'm Death now.
Oh, I liked Doug.
This quickly turns into Homer abusing his powers, including impressing Lisa's class on career day and getting himself and Bart better seats at a baseball game. This comes to bite him in the ass later on, however, when he discovers that the next soul on his list is Marge. Homer, although upset, realizes his responsibility and seemingly kills Marge. He then takes her corpse wrapped up in a blanket up to the mountain, where he asks God to lift this burden from him.
No.
Come on.
All right.
God turns Homer back to normal and takes Marge's corpse up to heaven, but before she gets there, it's revealed that there's been a double cross. Homer proceeds to escape the divine light of our Lord and Savior on a motorcycle and is able to lose him. The segment ends with a sappy family dinner and a warm feeling. I feel like this segment is definitely underappreciated. It does a good job mixing the horror and comedy aspect, although it relies a little more heavily on the latter, albeit it does so with some dark humor.
Take Millhouse. We all know there's no happy ending there.
There's a lot of charm here, and the one criticism I do have is that I kind of wish we had a few more scenes of people reacting to Death's absence. The two we got were really good, but I think it would have benefited the segment to have one or two more.
Jumping Yemeni!
This segment starts out with Homer getting a call from Sweden stating that he has won the Nobel Prize for Physics. Turns out, however, it was a wrong number, as the prize was actually meant for Professor Frink. Lisa delivers the news to Frink, who's overjoyed that the world has finally recognized the genius of the hammer screwdriver tool. Frink's one regret is that his father won't be there to see him accept the award. Turns out John and his father had a rocky relationship, and before they were able to patch it up, his father was killed in a shark attack, destroying many of his vital organs, and John's been preserving his body. Now is as good a time as any to reanimate him, though, since the Nobel Peace Prize is coming up, and the hammer screwdriver tool has been invented. Frink is able to bring his father back to life, albeit with many mechanical organs and the lack of a dick. In a traditional sense, that is. Frink's dad isn't having any of that, though, and goes on a rampage around town, ripping out various organs and body parts from the citizens of Springfield and adding them to his collective mass. I don't really know why he needed all those when only a small portion of his body was bitten off, but whatever. When Lisa comes to inform his father of John's achievements of winning the Nobel Prize, his dad realizes what a fool he's been, and he and Lisa head for Sweden for the ceremony. John's dad surprises him just as he wins the award, apparently back to normal somehow? He apologizes for going organ crazy, before his lust for organs kicks in when he sees all the brainiacs in the room and proceeds to go on a killing rampage, adding more brains to his body. Marge instructs Frink to stop his dad, which leads to arguably the best and only funny joke in this segment.
Yes, this should just about do it. Balzac!
With his dad dying in his arms, Frink states he can reanimate him once again, but his dad knows that's not a very good idea, and states that he's proud of his son for standing up to him, dying soon after. At the party afterwards, Frink reveals to Lisa that he actually was able to keep the spirit of his dad intact by keeping his soul in a box. And that's the end of Frankenstein. As far as middle segments go, this one is fine, although it does suffer from a lot of pacing problems. It kind of feels like a bunch of different ideas stitched together into one segment. Just like Frankenstein's monster! Oh, you clever writer, you. The horror aspect is almost non-existent, and the comedy kind of just falls flat at every turn, except that one joke I showed you earlier. I think this segment is best summed up with this one line.
I wish I was Death again. That was cool.
Me too, Homer. Me too. While going through a box of old comic books from the 70s that Marge found in the attic, Bart and Milhouse stumble upon an ad for a magic stopwatch that can freeze time, and decide to buy one. When it arrives, Bart tests it out on Lisa to make sure it works, and wouldn't you know it, it actually does! Bart and Milhouse then freeze time again, while holding the clock together, and everyone and everything except them is frozen. This leaves them open to pull some wacky pranks on Homer, Nelson, Skinner, and the rest of Springfield. Their pranks have gotten so bad that the mayor holds a town hall meeting, where he knew the perpetrators would strike, and catches Bart and Milhouse in the act by using an ultraviolet light.
Let us kill them before learning of the magical secret which they possess!
Needless to say, the townsfolk are not too pleased by this and begin chasing after Bart and Milhouse. Luckily, they freeze time just before they were going to get shot, but their carelessness leads to the clock now being broken, and them being stuck in frozen time. Bart and Milhouse take advantage of the situation and basically do whatever they want, stealing money and cool possessions and pulling pranks and whatnot. But they quickly get tired of this and want things to go back to normal. They find a book on watch repair which states that they should be able to fully repair the watch after 8 hours. Of course, Bart and Milhouse aren't exactly the brightest students in the shed, and it actually takes them 15 years to fix the stopwatch, with them being now in their mid-20s. Before they unfreeze time, they realize that the townsfolk are still mad at them and will be even more so when they see what else they've done in those 15 years. So they're going to need to come up with a plan that will use all their intellect. Brilliant. They unfreeze time and the townsfolk just... they go all out on Martin.
Dios mío! This kid is fun to hit!
Back at the Simpsons household, the family all stares in awe at Bart's new mid-20s body, except Lisa, who knows that it's because of the clock. Bart gives Lisa the clock to mess around with, and she presses the smaller button, which kinda just does a bunch of random stuff. It ends with the family hula hooping and having a good time. A solid segment all around, focusing heavily on the comedy, which luckily shines through here. It also feels like they cast the characters really well for this scenario, with Bart and Milhouse keeping their conniving and lame attitudes throughout, respectively.
Well, I didn't need any special power to know that was coming.
In a parody of Stephen King's The Dead Zone, an accident occurs while Homer is trying to get his frisbee off the roof with a bowling ball, accidentally hitting Ned Flanders and sending him to the emergency room. When Ned awakens and shakes Dr. Hibbert's hand, he foresees Dr. Hibbert falling to his death. This premonition comes true when Dr. Hibbert goes out on the ledge to receive Homer's frisbee and falls. At first, Ned thinks this is just a coincidence until he helps Hans Moleman down from a telephone wire, sees him being eaten by alligators, and then accidentally drops him in an open manhole where that vision becomes real. When he comes across Homer, he reveals his power to him, and Homer is giddy to find out how he dies. Ned reluctantly obliges, only to find out that Ned is going to shoot Homer. To avoid this outcome, Ned decides to put his house on the market and move away, but Homer doesn't believe that Ned can actually kill him. After some banter and teasing from Homer, Ned throws the gun in the wood chipper and is relieved to find out that he can indeed change the future. Only to find out that by not killing Homer, he has doomed the whole town, since Ned has a vision of Homer causing the nuclear plant to self-destruct. Ned tells Homer to stay away from the power plant, but Homer has a very valid reason why he should be at the power plant.
But you're gonna kill us all!
But ice cream cake!
Ned catches up to Homer at the power plant and tries to warn him not to push the button, but the soundproof glass and microphone static warp his message. Homer reaches for the button, and Ned, as a last resort, takes the sleeping security guard's gun and shoots him dead, saving the city.
Oh, you stupid son of a...
This segment, while lacking in the scares department, gave me a good amount of laughs, and really, that's all I can ask for right now.
I shall never grow up. In jail you will.
It's 1800 and there's a string of murders going around of the local ladies of the night. The one discernible feature about the killer is that he has mutton chops, so he is dubbed the Mutton Chop Murderer. After his latest victim stumps the police, Detective Lisa and her dim-witted assistant Bart take the case. They examine the bloody sword and bring it to an antique shop where they try to get answers from the person who sold the sword, only for him to be killed by the Mutton Chop Murderer before giving them a definitive answer. Luckily, they stumble across his ledger, which reveals that the swords were sold to Mr. Burns, who is mostly seen hanging around the opium den. Bart and Lisa decide to head for the opium den to pay Burns a visit, where he reveals that he sold the sword for opium to a fat man with mutton chops, which just happens to fit the description of Homer, who was suspiciously in the opium den at the same time. Homer attempts to flee, only to be apprehended by Wiggum. It looks like the case has been solved and everything can go back to normal, except... After examining the sword once more, Lisa notices an unusual yet familiar fragrance. We then cut to the day of Homer's hanging. Before Wiggum pulls the lever, Lisa comes out and reveals that Homer was innocent the whole time, and the true murderer left the scent of eel pie on the latest sword, which the chief just happens to be eating at that time. After Lou takes off Wiggum's hat, it's revealed that he does indeed have mutton chops and was the real mutton chop murderer. Turns out Chief just wanted to fabricate a case that not even Lisa can solve, but before he can pay for his crimes, he escapes on a hot air balloon, only for it to be destroyed by Kang and Kodos' spaceship. And you know what? I'm not even that big on steampunk, but I gotta say, I'm really digging the design. As far as whodunit segments go, of which I think this is the first one that Treehouse of Horror did, I'd say it did a pretty good job subverting my expectations. I actually did think that Homer was the real mutton chop murderer. Until they caught him and there was like still 2 minutes left, then it was kind of obvious. I think they did a really good job subverting my expectations. Or I'm just really dumb. It's probably the second thing.
Well, that hurt like hell.
At an invention expo, the Simpsons come across Professor Frank's latest creation, a pill that can cause eternal health. Of course, it's too big as is, so Frank has to shrink it down before it can be digested. Unfortunately, Maggie slipped away into the capsule before it gets shrunk down, thinking it was a ball pit, and Mr. Burns ingests the pill. After realizing that Maggie was in the pill, the Simpsons, Mr. Burns, Smithers, and Frank devise a plan to shrink the Simpsons down in a submarine to retrieve Maggie before she's digested, and... Okay, you know what? I could go into a lot of detail as to what happens here, but if you've seen one Fantastic Voyage satire, you've basically seen every Fantastic Voyage satire, so I'm just going to skip to the climax, if you don't mind. Sorry for all those expecting a 10-hour video essay on why this segment is the best one. That is not the case. They eventually rescue Maggie, but because of Maggie's extra weight, there isn't enough power to get everyone out of Mr. Burns, and someone has to stay behind. Take a guess who stays behind. Once the rest of them escape and embiggen, they attempt to get Homer out, but fail to do so, and he embiggens inside of Mr. Burns. The episode ends as a sort of role reversal of the ending of If I Only Had a Brain from Treehouse of Horror II with a big dance number. I really have nothing else to say about this segment. It was just so middle of the road in every aspect. That being said, there is one line I would like to highlight.
Oh my god! This is the worst Halloween horror we've ever faced!
Okay, look, I can handle you guys dropping in quality, but to then lie to my face like that, that's where you cross the line. Okay, look, we're just about at the halfway point, and I'm just gonna go watch some King of the Hill to get the sour taste of that out of my mouth. When we come back, we'll see if they can redeem themselves with the latter half of the segments. Yeah, probably not.
And out of the primordial sludge oozed Homer sapien.
Bart.
Notice the large stomach.
Bart.
Notice the extremely small cranium.
Bart!
Uh-oh, roll it, dude!
Will Dan be able to review the remaining 48 Treehouse of Horror segments without wanting to die? Will there be any returning faces to help him out? What new guests will we see throughout these next segments? And does anyone really care about the YouTube Halloween video in December? Find out your answer to all of these questions in the thrilling conclusion to this two-part Halloween spectacular. Merry Christmas!